what I guess the consummation of mathematical studies is supposed to be. You learn all these rules of arithmetic so that you can apply them later on, but somehow when you don't see the whole picture of where this is supposed to fit in, the tendency is just to devalue the entire experience and just say, well, I can't do these calculations quickly. I must not be a math person, or I'm no good at it. And that's really, if we talk about liberal education, that's a very illiberal way of thinking
Sure.
that through. We're not all about trying to calculate until we drop, but we're trying to see the big picture here, how this all fits in, and is a reason why like I don't think a mathematician would become a mathematician because they like endlessly crunching numbers. We do it because we see a real beauty that's present within this, and it's a beauty that requires patience in working through.
Welcome to Christendom Conversations. Together we'll explore the wisdom of the Catholic intellectual tradition, engage with thought-provoking ideas, and uncover deep insights into the perennial questions. We're thrilled to have you with us. Let's dive into today's conversation. Well, it's a great pleasure to have Professor Douglas Dailey here with us today. You are a professor of mathematics, associate professor in the Department of Mathematics and Natural Sciences here at Christendom College. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
So let's begin. How did you go from learning how to count at a presumably very young age to becoming a mathematics professor?
Oh, that's a big question. So yeah, I think I always had a fascination with numbers. I grew up on a farm in South Dakota, and I remember picking sweet corn with my dad and always needing to keep count of that. And that was something that a small of a thing, but even from a young age, I remember in elementary school, they had this math minute thing, and it was all about how many math questions can you do in a minute. And now I say that's actually terrible for people's morale to make them do such things, but I always rather enjoyed it. And it was something that it was a constant companion. So when I was in high school, I had an excellent mathematics teacher, and she really inspired in me the desire to keep on studying it. Went to university and wanted to, make a lot of money when I graduated. So I first, was going to do business and accounting, and it took me a semester of that to realize that wasn't for me. And then I thought, well, maybe economics, same story. I eventually kept on trying to do things that weren't mathematics, and ultimately it was when I was a sophomore. I took an introduction to advanced mathematics course where you learn logic and the methods of proof, and really to me that was the thing that it changed everything. I saw all these connections that I hadn't seen before, and it just it made the subject come alive for me in a way that it hadn't. So after that, I had, I guess by that point, abandoned my hopes of becoming rich because I had sort of fallen on teacher. I wanted to become a teacher. Yeah. So, but the relationships I had with my professors in particular at university, it was clear that I needed to become a college professor if I was going to teach. So went to graduate school after that, and here I am, became a professor following graduate school.
Yes, wow. And tell us a bit about, insofar as a layperson can comprehend this,
Sure.
about your advanced studies. Is there anything that's translatable into layman's terms?
I'll do my best. It's a challenge. In fact, it was always sort of sad for me when my parents came to my undergraduate mathematics thesis defense, and I said to them, they listened and they didn't understand a word of what I said. And I always thought that was so sad that there's no way to take this and boil it down. But my area was in graduate school, University of Nebraska was commutative algebra, which you can think of just algebra broadly as solving equations or solving systems of equations, trying to find x. But the field had progressed so far by the time of the in the early 1900s that it took on a different, more structural approach to it. So instead of asking the question, solve for x within this equation, it was what does the set of all such solutions look like, and it became so there's a lot of geometry that was involved in it, and this area known as topology where you're looking. So just take for a donut or a coffee cup is a great example of this, and there are ways that you can tell surfaces apart from each other based on what sort of drawings you can make on them. So the joke about mathematicians is that they look at a coffee cup and they see a donut because if you could take the coffee cup and sort of expand it out, so like stretch up the bottom and then sort of wrap it around the handle on it, you make a donut out of that. So that sort of of taking a surface and changing it in some sort of a form is what they do in topology, sort of bendable surfaces.
Okay.
But then there's an algebraic theory that's developed on, the things that you can do on those surfaces and the things that you can do on some surfaces that you can't on others become known as invariance of the surface, and there are all sorts of properties that can be studied. So my area takes that as sort of its launching point, but then it leaves it far behind because it just abstracts further upon that. In fact, there are some who refer to my area of homologic algebra as just abstract nonsense, and even some of the practitioners take pride in that fact.
I was thinking more. Your dissertation was on donuts and whether sprinkles were possible.
That's right. Yeah. Well, there's one. It's called the hairy ball theorem, which is if you've got a ball that's got hair sticking up in it, can you comb the whole ball in such a way so that no hair is pointing straight up? And the answer is no. There's always one hair pointing straight up. And I remember a professor made the joke that you could call it the hairy monkey theorem, and there's no way to comb a monkey's hair without one hair of it sticking up. But he said the funny thing is if you glue its two hands together, then it becomes basically the same as that donut, and it's possible to comb the glued monkey.
So I see a theme of donuts here.
Yeah,
So did you have lunch?
Donuts and coffee. The mathematician Paul Erdős says that mathematician is a machine for turning coffee beans into theorems.
Okay, that's funny. Is Erdős the one who had the number, the particular in terms of how? Do you have an Erdős number?
I think I do. Yeah. Well, every mathematician who's published with somebody else, chances are that they do. I think mine is 3 or 4. So 4 degrees of separation between a mathematical collaborator with me and Paul Erdős. So
we have a children's book at home about him.
Oh, yeah.
And it's just fascinating. He sounds like he was early 20th century Hungarian.
That's right.
Okay.
Yeah. And I think he had something like 700 collaborators in his life on different publications. I mean, truly prolific and just itinerant. Would go around and just work on theorems with people on questions of all sorts of areas. Yeah.
Apparently couldn't cut his own food. He was just really one of those sorts.
That's right. But was a great mathematician.
Yeah, it's funny that you have a number. I wonder, I should have asked you that sooner, but that's fascinating. Well, I would think that there would be quite a change in studying mathematics in university, in almost a pure mathematical context, to studying and teaching within more of a context devoted to liberal education, liberal arts. Can you say a bit about that change and what that looks like?
Yeah. Actually, I felt it sort of acutely when I went to graduate school, that in university, I was part of the honors program there, and I studied, mathematics alongside many other disciplines. And I really enjoyed being able to bounce between a literature course or history course and my mathematics studies. When I went to graduate school, it was really hard, actually, the transition to just taking all math all the time. And there was a time there where I actually thought about leaving graduate school because I needed some sort of an outlet for those other interests. But eventually I sort of discerned that I had the talent for mathematics. I should stick it out, and I'm certainly glad that I did. Now, teaching at Christendom in particular, it's given me the time and the space to come back and to wrestle with some of those questions that I wanted to know more about in graduate school. It wasn't for a lack of effort of trying to do those in grad school that I didn't have the time. It was most mathematicians tend to be somewhat allergic to those questions. I remember raising it with one of my professors that this is after I had graduated. I said that I was getting into more of the historical or philosophical questions in mathematics. And he just said, "Oh, well, you'll get over that." As if it was some sort of disease that was soon cured. There's a grain of truth to what he says, because ultimately it's mathematics that I love. And it's, dealing with the hard facts of mathematics that I enjoy. And the philosophical questions are difficult. But still, it's something that I keep returning to. So now, really with students, when I can lead them in sort of independent study projects, I really play up the philosophical aspects of it, just more reflections on mathematics. But it is because, I mean, my classroom work is really still on the hard facts of mathematics.
Sure.
But especially at a place like this, they're always asking more philosophical questions. So it's lively for me.
It's a bad habit. Yeah. What's the nature of this, and what's its purpose?
That's right. That's right.
I mean, they're good habits. So
Yep.
they can. Well, this actually leads me to the question about the essay you wrote, the article you wrote. I think it was in Logos on Plato and Augustine and mathematics. Do you want to say a bit about that study and what?
Yeah. I mean, really. So I had a sabbatical a couple years ago, and it was the first time that I could just devote some time to reading and just reflecting on what I had read over the years on these topics. And I came across this great article by a Russian mathematician named Shafarevich, who really sort of hit the nail on the head for me, and something that I had been reflecting on, because he was looking at the proliferation of mathematical results. I mean, there's an online repository where people would post their preprints to articles, and they're like tens of thousands, tens of thousands every year that are new. And he said, well, if it's just this uncontrolled growth in all directions, what purpose is actually driving where mathematical studies are going? And it's just a sort of a short reflection of his, but he says at the end that, if we're trying to find some sort of a purpose, we can't go to the practical applications, because many developments happen without any application. And it also wasn't it wasn't for really any other reason than he posited a religious reason, going back to how it was originally viewed by Pythagoreans. So I wanted to explore that a little bit more, and given that he started off with really a Greek tradition, went back to Plato. So in Book 7 of the Republic, he talks about the education of the future rulers of the ideal city, and what they need to know in order to do what they're going to be doing. And he really makes an emphasis on mathematics being essential for that preparation. It's like they get to play around with mathematics for 10 years as children, and then they get 10 years of intense studies. So I've got some ideas about what we can do for mathematics at Christendom.
Kind of a long BA.
Yeah, that's a very long BA, yes. But anyways, he sort of unfolds this. He sets up sort of the same situation, that it can't be practical. Like, practical is great, and he's talking about arraying troops in a battle, or other practical concerns. But that's not the main reason, and it's not intellectually formative. It's also great for that, in terms of being able to see, the synthesis that mathematical thought requires. But for Plato, it's to serve some sort of a transcendent purpose, that it sort of takes a person out of, what changes here, from day to day, into something which is just eternally is just true. So that was the real reason that Plato and Socrates wanted to see that incorporated into their education. Augustine goes further and makes it a little bit more religious in the Christian sense, that he, in an early work after his conversion, talks about how number is essential in all of the disciplines of the trivium and the quadrivium. And then goes on to give, in his work on free will, a proof of God's existence, where he needs to establish that truth exists in the first place. And he uses mathematics and number as one of those examples. He actually goes so far as to say that number and wisdom are the same thing, one and the same thing, which I've always appreciated that. Thank you, Augustine. But so anyways, that was where that project led. For me, it was helpful to work through what they said, because I'd always been looking for more of that purpose. When I was grinding through dissertation, it was easy to lose track of that in the sight of just these abstractions that one felt one was dealing with. So,
yeah. Well, I find it fascinating that it's this idea that mathematics, in a sense, has a practical, as you say, arraying troops. I think that was Glaucon's point of view. So
Right.
you had to lay out a camp and things of that sort. There was that dimension of rigor It sort of trains the mind. And that's often an argument in favor of liberal education, is you'll be a better thinker, a better problem solver. And there was also a moral element, right? That somehow if you understand the nature of number and good, and it can lead to how you order your life.
Right.
Which is kind of an interesting idea as well.
It is.
But you mentioned that St. Augustine actually brings number not only into the quadrivium, but he also, which is there, but he extends it into the trivium, which people don't always expect. That's
right.
the verbal. Those are the verbal arts, supposedly.
They are.
So how did number find its way there?
I mean, it's a pretty simple thing that he says. It's just that you wouldn't be able to consider in grammar just even the the combination of syllables to make a word, unless you had some ability to count the syllables that make up something. I really think that it's I probably overspoke. Certainly grammar. Logic is the trickier one because the method of mathematics is so logical. Right. It's almost on a fundamental level difficult to distinguish the two of them. And number being involved in rhetoric, probably not so much. But I mean, his consideration is really just that there's really nothing that you can do where quantity in some form does not just inform the subject itself. Yeah,
well, you can enumerate the parts of speech.
Right.
You can. I mean, there's a sense in which it does find its way. Into everything. Which, thinking of the quadrivium, makes me think of music. And you have a musical background as a singer, is that right?
Some, yeah. In undergrad, I was involved.
And we'll put a link in the show notes to some of your YouTube videos. Is that?
Oh, please no.
Okay. No.
Thankfully, there are none of those.
Okay. Well, can you? I mean, in your mind, how? Have you reflected much on that relationship between music and mathematics?
I mean, some. I remember when I was studying, because I studied physics for a time in my effort to study anything but mathematics as an undergrad, and I played around with the harmonies in the way that the Pythagoreans would, making the like plucking the string and doing that. And I developed demonstrations as we go around to different physics clubs in the area and showed them that. But other than that, it's you either have the topic of harmonics as the Pythagoreans understood it. And then you've got sort of the modern understanding of harmonics, which becomes, it's very rich. We can, I know that there's works on like Fourier analysis in understanding, wave patterns and whatnot. But like just this music itself, to me, it felt like I was expressing something that was akin to the exhilaration that one would feel in doing great mathematical insight. And it's a tough thing for me to articulate exactly what that connection was.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, because you've got the numbers. I think you were describing sort of a monochord where you sound out different relationships.
Yep.
But then even music, when it becomes embodied in dancing, there's sort of the numbers there.
Yeah.
So it does seem to be, there are a lot of ways it finds its way in.
Just on that, Augustine says something about that in thinking about the creation of the world, that you see in the movement of an artisan at work in creating just anything. Just these, he talks about these numbers, like this proportionality to the way in which he moves in order to make a table or whatever it might be that he's working on, and he uses that as an analogy that we too should think back on. Look at the marvels of the world and see in that God the Creator at work, making it through the sciences or through mathematics. He says it much more eloquently than I just did there.
Yeah, well, there's that passage in the Book of Wisdom about which, as a growing up Protestant, I didn't know anything about this book, but in which it talks about, and it's almost a throwaway line. I think it's a subordinate clause in the larger verse there, but basically that God made everything in weight, order, and number.
That's right.
In each of those three, there's or harmony sometimes, and so each one of those there's a number in there. The order is first, second, and third, and there's a weight. You can measure the weight.
Right.
And so this sense that there's by extension, music behind every aspect of reality. There's certainly, I think, a case to be made that number is there.
Yes.
Does modern physics and science support this?
That number is
behind everything?
Oh, certainly. Yeah. I mean, it would be. It's hard to imagine it being otherwise. I mean, Einstein was famous for saying that. That whatever intelligence was behind the workings of the universe is something that's so far beyond our comprehension how minute the scale of the universe can go, and in the quantity that is that's present there. And I mean, it really is fundamental because we can't really consider objects without thinking about quantity in some sort of a form. Like the fact that there are two coffee mugs on this table, points to the fact that there is some unity, which is fundamentally a coffee mug, and that's
Right.
just something that is one. And that's, I mean, falling back on philosophy there, what you know Augustine or Socrates would say is that points to something that we couldn't comprehend that
Right.
notion of unity without our senses. So yeah, certainly in the physical world, I mean, it is a fundamental idea. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I'm thinking about that sort of journey. If we're willing to think about it in these terms, from sort of becoming to being, that sort of philosophical journey that I think Plato was talking about.
Yeah.
Are there certain forms of mathematics that are more conducive to that?
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's well. So with Euclidean geometry, which is Euclidean, you can't talk about mathematics in that sense without falling back on Euclid, because Euclid's method and the elements are just the bedrock for what came for mathematics for centuries afterwards. So in a way, it's that's sort of the clearest exposition as to what the mathematical method ought to be that exists. But I think there's a tendency to look at Euclid and to make that sort of the end of one's mathematical studies. And in that sense, you can ignore many of the great achievements that came following that, and I mean, raise the controversial non-Euclidean geometries that might also exist too. Now, in the way that the high school curriculum is sort of structured, it makes calculus seem as though it should be the end of everybody's study. Like, oh, I took calculus in high school, and it's great. It's great when you have that opportunity, and calculus is itself wonderful. But to me, if you're going to want to encounter a real mathematical education, you need to understand the notion of really coming back to what Euclid's form is, and if not necessarily the content, but at least the form of we've got definitions here, we got proofs. And whatever topic that you end up encountering where the subject is laid out in that way, where there's a logical buildup, I think it tends to be, I don't know, from my experience teaching students, it really revolutionizes the way that they've thought about mathematics. Because so often, they spend so much time in the becoming that they never get to the being of that. What I guess the consummation of mathematical studies is supposed to be. You learn all these rules of arithmetic so that you can apply them later on, but somehow when you don't see the whole picture of where this is supposed to fit in, the tendency is just to devalue the entire experience and just say, well, I can't do these calculations quickly. I must not be a math person, or I'm no good at it. And that's really, if we talk about liberal education, that's a very illiberal way of thinking that through. So to me, the best thing for someone who's trying to study that is really just to tell them, oh, just bear with this patiently. Fall back on what it is that you have learned, and try to see this in a different perspective. We're not all about trying to calculate until we drop, but we're trying to see the big picture here. How this all fits in, and is a reason why. Like, I don't think a mathematician would become a mathematician because they like endlessly crunching numbers. We do it because we see a real beauty that's present within this, and it's a beauty that requires patience in working through. But I don't know if that answered your question.
That's very helpful. We'll use the B word, which I plan to bring up eventually. The beauty word. Well, it reminds me a bit about study of music. It is possible that you're, as a singer or an instrumentalist, you simply become a note producer. As long as you can produce notes, the right notes at the right time, in tune, fast enough, in the right way, then you're fulfilling your function as a musician. And you never get beyond the production of notes to think about beauty. And I think there are parallels even in athletics. There are ways, as long as you
Yeah.
can run this fast or lift this much, and in a way, it becomes very anti-human.
Right.
And so you would think if you hung out with a bunch of musicians, they'd have some profound things to say about beauty. But the fact is they're almost more cogs in the machine.
Right.
Whether they're in an orchestra or a band or a choir, it just matters whether they can produce.
Right.
And you never get that larger vision, which is part of what I think liberal education does.
Sure.
Is you kind of can do a both and. You can sort of focus on the particular, but also try to get a more integrated vision of the whole.
That's right. That's interesting. I mean, I remember my wife saying that she was involved in band, and she always said that it was the best moment when you just felt like something clicked, and there was a unity that was present among the band, and I certainly understand that from choir as well. This is reminding me of an interesting book where the author is talking about how is it that we pass on the knowledge, like what is of arts in particular, and he's saying that there was this study done where they were talking about the touch of a pianist. Is the touch of a pianist this thing that actually exists? And in order to do this, they took some sort of piano and they removed from it all weights so that they could actually sort of record to minute detail, the force with which the keys were being pressed in order to perform it. And that still did not explain everything that was happening with the sound of the piano itself. Like there was something that was inarticulate that you just couldn't put your finger on that was making this that was making that production of the piece possible. So too with the point that that the author was making is that in science or in passing on an art from master to apprentice or to pupil, that there's always this unspoken aspect that the master himself can't even articulate it because he's just embodied it through that practice, and the student just learns that by way of imitating the professor or the master's work. So yeah, there's something profound there.
Yeah. Well, and even though the idea of apprenticeship is so closely aligned with things that the more mechanical arts or the practical arts, I do think it's probably one of the best ways of describing what the best of liberal education is.
Yes,
there is a kind of apprenticeship.
There is. I've reflected on that recently, just trying to pick up on what those more inarticulate aspects of my own formation were, and it came in the sort of the throwaway moments where a professor would just stand back from the board and after just speaking of abstract nonsense, after having proven the snake lemma, it's called the snake lemma. I have memories of the professor just, giggling as he was going through it, and that sticks with me to this day, that there was something that was profoundly beautiful about that. And, because it created this joy in him. And, it was in moments like that where I received something that now I guess I try to pass on to my own students. But it's something that's very difficult to put one's finger on exactly what makes that delightful. It just is, and you have to experience it.
Yeah. There's a kind of interpersonal superfluity that is that results in joy.
That's right. It takes place in the classroom too. I mean, it's born out of a moment, and it's nothing that you can go like. I mean, I've taught these classes now numbers of times that I teach here, and every class is unique because every student and every group of students brings their own personal charism to the class, and it's what makes going back time and time again interesting for me. I can do the same material, but it's never perceived in the same way. It's never gone through in the same way, and it's a wonderful experience.
Yeah. Well, there does seem to be, in discussions of liberal education and the liberal arts, there is sort of and then there have been, people have been discussing this for a very long time, but there does seem to be a break between what we think of as liberal education normally and the mathematical and the scientific. Mm-hmm. I mean, here at Christendom, we're bringing those together. How do you account for that break? Is it just the fact that mathematics became and science became so specialized and required so much study and training that you couldn't do it all. You couldn't do both. Is it as simple as that, or are there other things inherent that led to that sort of division?
Yeah, I mean, I think part of it is certainly that the specialization of it became such that it's, I mean, even for somebody who, I was a commutative algebraist, by training, if you had asked me, what was on the frontier of partial differential equations, I couldn't even begin to tell you. It was, even though they're, still both taught in the same department,
Right.
and people who had specialties in those, it was really hard to find the commonalities, or just to have the breadth of mind that was required in order to go back and forth between them. And as a result of that, in order to make a mathematics just an undergraduate curriculum, do justice to what the prevailing, system would say, you have to cover an awful lot of ground.
Right.
So, things like, core curriculums or general education requirements, become de-emphasized. So I think that's certainly one aspect of it. But I'd really think too that it has to do something with losing that feeling of, I mean, mathematicians do still have that sense of wonder and that sense of joy that's in doing their mathematical work. But somehow I think we lost the ability to share that in a way that's essentially human. There's been this movement within the last 10 years of talking about just following a book of this name, that Mathematics for Human Flourishing, that, what are the goods that a mathematical education can make for the human person, and to be a little bit more reflective on that. Because the other aspect, and I think this is what people's feeling about mathematics often is that it's just this cold and austere, impersonal, you just got to sit down and grind through it. And I think that when you're working toward over-specialization, that there's a tendency to really emphasize that, that aspect, and you lose sight of the fact that, well, if there weren't for humans at all, we wouldn't be doing mathematics. Right. I think those go hand in hand with each other, though. The specialization and just the loss of feeling that it's of no importance to someone's education on a personal level.
Yeah. And to go back to beauty, which we talked about a little while ago, do you think beauty is a pathway back into mathematics? And
I hope so. I mean, this is what I try to emphasize to my own students, because they often come from the perspective of just math anxiety or whatever the case might be. So I try to show them. I try to ask them questions that are just get them to wonder. One of my places I like starting with it is to just, if you ask a question about prime numbers, people, chances are that the answer is unknown. And it's, prime number is just a number divisible by 1 in itself. And you can, like Euclid showed, or is credited for showing that there are infinitely many prime numbers, that there's no end to that list. But then here's a simple question that the notion of a twin prime, primes being 2 apart. So like 5 and 7 are twin primes, or 11 and 13 are twin primes, 17 and 19. And you ask the question, okay, well, you could prove there are infinitely many primes. Are there infinitely many twin primes, twin prime pairs? And the answer is unknown. So, and there are many other questions like that I could ask about just something as simple as twin primes. And I hope that at least breaks the ice a little and shows people that, this is not something that was solved once and for all a long time ago, and we're just dealing with the consequences, learning what came before us. But that there are still frontiers and very simple asked questions, that has to entice somebody to keep going, or just to, that's intriguing. How could it be that we can define this concept? We can give so many examples of these, but we can't find a general principle for why this is the case. So instilling in them that wonder, the beauty is one that takes, you have to, there's a bit of mathematical patience that's required in order to get to the beautiful, I would say. But nonetheless, there are, I think that even just seeing results that, where the logic comes in and it builds up on itself, there's just a beauty to being able to stand back and comprehend the whole of a theory. And that's something that I try emphasizing when I teach core here, for example.
Yeah. Well, you did that study previously of Plato and Augustine and mathematics. Are there other frontiers, horizons that are sort of in the back of your mind? You think, I'd like to pursue those?
Yeah. So I'm always interested in this question of like apprenticeship. Like, what is it that apprenticeship should look like in just education broadly, but in mathematics specifically? You know, what is it that ought to be handed on, and what's the best method for that? Another interest of mine lately is, I mean, this is sort of tied to the same thing, because my answer to that fundamentally comes back to that it's got to be a personal, experience. The big push in, I mean, the world in general, but in mathematics too, is AI these days, and just thinking about, what can that do for, like, is there a good for AI in mathematical education even? What's to be gained there? What's to be lost there? So I've been sort of reflecting on those types of questions too. But really, I just when I come across someone who, because I mean, there are examples of mathematicians who are eminent in their field, and then toward the end of their lives decided to turn to more philosophical habits and really reflect on what the meaning of everything was that they had done. Coming across those and just trying to imbibe the wisdom that they had attained. That's curling up with a good book is always enjoyable for a professor too. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's wonderful. And I mean, I will say that you have inspired a lot of students here. I heard an anecdote recently that someone was thinking about being a math major because of your calculus course.
Oh, wow,
I think the quote was, "You made calculus come alive."
Ah, how about
that? So it's clear that the joy you've experienced personally as a student has flowed over into your teaching.
Good.
And I think that's the key to things like beauty, wonder. Those are going to be the keys to bridging that divide.
Right.
And I think we believe that's possible. Otherwise, we wouldn't have our curriculum set up the way we do. And so it's great to be at a place that has that fundamental orientation and commitment.
Agreed.
So,
and I mean, it's exciting for me too. I mean, the students, in their studies at the core here, receive something that I never received, just at a secular university. That I mean, you mentioned this earlier. They're asking those questions, or they're at least comfortable to think about those questions, and they're in a space where they can. So, that makes it lively for me as well, because, we can just bat around ideas and think about things in a way that, I hope is interesting to them. I know it's certainly interesting for me. I've always said that, the best classes that I've had and some of the best students, I've gotten so much out of them in terms of just, thinking about things in a different way that I would never have done. I only hope that I've given them something, toward the end of it. Yeah.
Well, it seems like you have. So thank you very much. And thank you for your time today.
Thank you very much. I enjoyed this.
Sure. Thank you for listening to Christendom Conversations. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe and leave a review on your favorite podcast platform. To learn more about Christendom College and its mission, visit us at christendom.edu. Until next time, may we all continue to seek the truth, live the faith, and restore all things in Christ. God bless.